Well, thanks, Chris.
Frank's there.
Fred.
I drew a text. I got something from Frank too, but I can't pull it up.
We just got the WHCA's live chat.
Yep. So we are live right now. We will be opening the meeting shortly. We had some technical difficulties. But once everybody's logged on, I will officially, as superintendent, open up the meeting. So please stand by. I've muted all participants at this point.
Low. Battery, please charge.
Shit, my earphones are gonna die right now.
Hey guys.
Hi, Laura.
Okay, this is Bruce. Hello?
Hi, Bruce.
Hi.
We're on hold. We're waiting for a few more members. And we'll start momentarily.
Okay, fine.
I think we're waiting for Matt Dyer. Matt, if you're on, can you just say hi? And Mr. Anderson from Whitman Finance. Gonna wait another minute and then we'll start. We're already behind a little schedule.
Are we voting for best Zoom background? Because I think Justin Evans might get that. I don't know. Fred's a close second.
I know Chris Howard's pretty.
I know you are
right
out
now.
there. You're where we want to be, Chris.
So I'm unmuting all of us right now. I'm officially going to go on. Welcome to the 2020 Regional Agreement Amendment Committee meeting, the first one of this year. It's about 3:10. We are doing a virtual Zoom teleconference meeting. It's April 8th. This meeting is being held fully remotely in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GL Section 330A, Section 20. I'm the superintendent of schools, Jeff Simonak, and this is the first meeting. I will call your name out, and if you would just say present as a member of the, I should say this is a subcommittee of the Regional School Committee, and we have members of the school committee and the town of Whitman and Hanson both represented. So when I call your name, would you just say present, please? Chris Scriven, school committee member in Whitman.
Present.
Chris Howard, school committee member in Hanson.
Present.
Justin Evans, Whitman Board of Selectmen.
Present.
Rick Anderson, Whitman FinCom.
Present.
Chris George, Town of Whitman Community Member at Large.
Present.
Matt Dyer, Board of Selectmen, Hanson. Okay. Laura Kemet, Board of Selectmen, Hanson.
Present.
Bruce Young, Town of Hanson Community Member at Large.
Present.
Those are our voting members for this committee. Non-voting members are myself, Jeff Simonak, Superintendent of Schools, George Farrow, Assistant Superintendent of Schools,
Present.
Frank Lineup, Town of Whitman Town Administrator,
Present.
John Stanbrook, Town of Hanson Town Administrator, and Bob Hayes, School Committee Chair.
Present.
Okay, since this is a subcommittee of the Regional School Committee, my recommendation for chair of this school of this meeting would be the vice chair of the school committee, Chris Scriven. Is there any opposition to Chris Scriven being the chair of this committee, since it's a subcommittee of the school committee? Hearing none, I'd like to, excuse me.
I'm sorry, Jeff, I was just asking you, just generally throwing that out there, or?
Well, this is a subcommittee of the school committee, so, and all our subcommittees of the school committee, we have a school committee member as the chair of that committee.
Oh, I don't have a
Um,
problem with it. I was just wondering if you were just generally throwing that concept out there.
No, so this is how the school committee
You want a motion?
subcommittees have run. And if you want to, I'll ask that for a motion from somebody.
So moved. That's Bruce.
Okay,
Bruce,
second,
Bruce
anybody?
motion, Chris Howard will second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that?
Low. Battery,
Okay,
please charge.
hearing none. Can I just get a vote of the committee? Just raise your hand. I can see everyone.
Well, you can't,
Or
yeah, it has to be roll
vote,
call.
Michelle?
Yep.
Okay,
And I'm sorry,
Mr.
Jeff,
Evans?
but just as a preliminary matter, are we sure that we're meeting the requirement of the open meeting law? Because the Zoom conference that Chris posted is not available to the public, and that is the preliminary, like, kind of piece of it, is that you've got to allow the public not to participate, but at least to be able to, like, witness or hear what is being said. And obviously we couldn't have anticipated we would have had technical issues, but I just want to make sure that we're comfortable with proceeding.
well, we are live on local cable right now.
Right, but the requirement is that you have to post the meeting with the information to be able to see the meeting. So I know that you're saying cable, but the Zoom credentials also, I believe, are supposed to be posted. I'll defer to the rest of the group. I just want to bring that up as a point of, of clarity.
Laura, if I may, the rules state that if you're not able to broadcast live or present live, you must make that recording available within 24 hours. And you have to file the minutes of the meeting the next day or as soon thereafter as practical.
All right, thanks, Frank. That's helpful. I just want to make sure, Jeff, that we weren't stepping
Yes.
into some, quagmire here.
Thanks, Laura. So can I get a roll call? We're going to do a roll call for chair. Justin Evans. You're muted, Justin.
Yes.
Chris Howard,
Yes.
Chris Scriven,
Yes.
Rick Anderson,
Yes.
Chris George,
Yes.
Matt, are you on, Matt Dyer? Laura Kemet
Yes.
and Mr. Young.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scriven. You are now chair, and this is your meeting.
Thank you. I guess we'll start with a moment of silence. Pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
The
of the
flag
United States of
United
America
States of America,
and to the republic
Republic,
Republic,
which it stands,
Yes.
one nation,
One
nation,
under
one
God,
under
nation,
God,
under God,
indivisible, with
indivisible,
liberty
liberty,
with
and
liberty
justice
justice
for all.
justice
Thank you.
for all.
Nice touch mug there, Michelle.
Thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for attending. We wanted to call this meeting, get this group together to discuss our impasse as it relates to our district's budget. We convened a regional committee a while back, and we decided to hold off on meeting again as we understood the towns essentially needed to work out something. So now, after a time, I'm hearing at least that there hasn't been much movement. So the idea is to get everybody together and see if we can get the ball rolling. Does anyone have any discussion? I guess is what you would, how we do this. I apologize. My first meeting I've run, so. But I'm hoping that we can get some good dialogue going, and we can continue to meet as often as needed. Once we get, iron out the kinks of the Zoom, it does make things a little easier to get everyone together. So that being said, like I was saying, does anyone have anything to update our committee on, any kind of talks or progress or anything like that?
Chris, if I
Yep.
may,
Yep.
if this is the regional agreement committee, you can't talk about school budget. You have to stick to talking about the regional agreement committee unless, I think we're getting off topic. Isn't the charge of this committee to look at the regional agreement, not the budget?
Okay, well, is there anything we can do within the agreement then that'll help us
There you go.
get past our impasse? Chris?
So go ahead, Chris.
So I guess I would throw this out to the group in the spirit of trying to get us to move forward fairly quickly from this impasse. So if we look at the existing regional agreement, the language around the apportionment of operating costs, page 7, section E, subsection 1, presently spells out the agreement methodology that I think everyone on this call is fully aware of in terms of how that works, which distill it to its simplest forms is just a per pupil expenditure. There's been a lot of discussion around the various assessment methodologies. What I would propose for this group to consider is, as a phased approach, that specific language within the agreement, come up with something that would be a framework to move us past this year, simply focus on that as this phase, use that in this budget cycle, and then after the budget cycle, or concurrently, we work towards fully working through the agreement itself. I know the agreement's been looked at before. I think some folks on this call were on there previously, but I think a lot's changed. I think simply just saying, let's just take the last agreement that was voted by the school committee and actually voted and then subsequently rescinded by the town of Hanson. I don't think it's going to work. I think there's going to be too many things that we're going to have to open back up and look at. So what I would propose is kind of a phased approach, with phase 1 simply being, can we work through that very specific language around how we handle the costs, and specifically, is there a way we can just get to maybe a compromise where for year 1, it's just maybe we use half the alternative methodology and half the statutory methodology. That would literally get us to basically a 50-50 split.
Rick?
Mr. Chairman, I really don't think I can express fully how disappointed I am in the fact that the school committee has yet to present a budget for this fiscal cycle. We have stated publicly in the past, and some of these meetings, school committee budget meetings especially, that the Whitman Finance Committee will not support any assessment that is calculated with anything other than the statutory method. And just as a follow-up, in our last two meetings, we talked about this very specifically. And I've been tasked further by the full committee to publicly state that this finance committee will not recommend any phased implementation or any other financial consideration that causes us to pay Hanson's bills. And basically that, Mr. Howard, is your proposition from how I can see. So I would say that I am emphatically opposed to any recommendation or changes to the regional agreement that would affect that type of a change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I make a statement?
Bruce?
Yes. I was under the impression that, at least I was asked, in order to be on this committee, would you be in a position to be able to compromise any of what your positions may be, or what you may have thought should be the way that the school should be calculating the assessment? And I said, surely I will. And I think that was echoed probably best by Christine Lynch from the DESC, when she said that this whole situation should be worked out in anticipation of coming up with a method of assessment that would be acceptable to the voters of both towns, or the townspeople of both towns. So, I mean, if you take a hardball approach and say, basically this is going to be statutory or nothing, or basically this is going to be a percentage of pupils method or nothing, then really, if I had taken that position, there would be no way in the world I would want to be on that committee, because I'm looking for a fair compromise, as Christine Lynch basically said, probably 2.5 months or 3 months ago now, that both towns would be willing to accept. And from the standpoint of Town of Hanson, sure, we'd like to continue the same way that we have for the past 60 years. And I can see Whitman's position that they would like to go with the statutory method, because obviously that basically favors them this year on a financial standpoint to the tune of $1,150,000. So in order to get by this year, I basically agree with Chris. We should calculate basically where we would be using the statutory method, calculate where we would be using the agreement method, take an average of the two. That works out to somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000, rather than $1.2 million. That would be where I would be starting, and then we can work from there. That's basically where I would look to go on this.
And may I speak, Mr. Scrivener?
Sure, Laura, yeah.
And I think that I can certainly appreciate where Mr. Anderson is coming, and I think he's been on the record really consistently with that position. But I think what I would say is he's one member of this committee. And I think that if the majority of the committee is willing to work on some type of compromise, and I don't know whether that ends up being what Chris has just proposed or not, but we've got to start someplace, then I think that's what I'm hoping is going to happen when we have this conversation. Without compromise, I don't even see why we're meeting, really. Honestly, it's sort of like, why are we even bothering to meet? And I am an eternally optimistic person, so I refuse to take that position.
Thank you, Laura. Chris, go ahead. Chris George. Are you on mute, I think, Chris?
So I understand, I think, where everybody's coming from. The one thing I would mention, I think we need to be very careful about how we structure any compromise, assuming we can reach a compromise. So part of the rules here are that local assessments cannot go down, particularly due to a change in method. And so if we build a compromise into Whitman's assessment, that could quite frankly hurt both towns in future years where we'd be held to a budget that at least meets that assessment, maybe even more. So we should be thinking about, right? So if we were to just take 600,000 and add that to Whitman's assessment, then the following year, not only would Whitman have to meet that, the budget would have to be reflective of that and could force us into a higher situation. So we should also be thinking about creative ways to do this. Are there items that we could pull out as capital that maybe Whitman could fund? Things of that nature. So you got to be careful about what you do here from an assessment perspective.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm not following that at all.
Justin?
I think we should lay out what the actual objectives are for this committee before we get too far into this conversation. If our goal is to amend the regional agreement to structure a compromise, that's not going to get done for this fiscal year. It may not get done for next fiscal year. Even if we had an agreement to send to DESE tomorrow, they've got a lot going on right now. They're probably not going to approve something in the next 2 months. So any agreement that we can come to for this budget cycle is going to have to exist within the current agreement and the rules of Chapter 70 right now.
As I understand it, Justin, if we were to come out of this committee with a compromise, it would then go back to the school committee to be voted on. And then it would be sent to DESE for preliminary approval, which would enable us to go to the town meeting with it and let the voters vote on it. I could be wrong, but that's my understanding.
Okay, but so to Justin's point though, Chairman Scriven, what is our objective? What is our stated objective for this? Just to try to help us keep on track, because there are a lot of different moving parts here. You know, we've got the budget, we've got the assessment methodology, we've got the regional agreement, and they are definitely inextricably linked, but we're going to have to try to de-link them for the purposes of A, transparency, B, actually getting something done, and C, sticking with the open meeting law regulations, which state we've got to stick with our intent, our purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I get it. To be honest, as I mentioned before, my objective was to get past our impasse, right? And however we need to do that legally, and to Bob's point earlier, I know we need to narrow the focus of this meeting, but that's my objective. So however we can accomplish that, that's what I'd like to do. And I mentioned earlier how we can meet again soon, and we can meet as often as we need to. So if we need to circle back and figure out how we want to come at this, so be it. I'm all for it. I'll meet as often as we need to. Yeah, I guess my objective was to try to get everybody together and get some movement on our impasse. Rick, I think I saw you with your hand up.
Yes, just a follow up and just a clarification on your outline. You specifically said that, what our objective for a timeline would be is to this committee to somehow come to some type of an agreement or a compromise, and then for that to be then sent to the school committee for a vote, subsequently to the state, and then, as you said, to each member town for ratification of the amendment. Is that correct?
That's how I understand it, yes.
So again, I really liken this whole exercise to an exercise in futility if in fact one town is most likely not going to accept any type of a compromise of a recommendation that includes its town departments to supplement their budgets with budgets of a member town. That's all. And just to follow up on the using a number of years to average out what could be some type of a compromise, I would suggest that we go back a number of years and calculate for the last 6 years the $4.2 million that Women has overpaid in this process, and use that for the average if you're looking to average out some type of a compromise. in my estimation, the compromise has already taken place, and we're still on the losing side, the taxpayers of Whitman, that is. And that, again, from the financial aspects of the Finance Committee is where my position is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Bruce.
can somebody explain to me what retroactive overpay is? Because if we're hearing things like that people actually believe, then we're really not going to get anywhere here. So somebody please explain to me what retroactive overpay is.
Rick, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. That wasn't the term that I used. That wasn't the term that I used. I specifically said that the town of Whitman, because it has not been using the statutory method in the school committee, using this calculation of the statutory method in the last 4 years, or 6 years, or however many years, there is a very factual document that we can provide to the members of the committee that shows specifically how much the town of Whitman overpaid by not using the statutory method in calculating the assessment for the Whitman-Hanson Regional School budget.
All right,
I'd
so,
be happy to provide that document to the committee.
right. So as I understand it, we, it's the 300-pound gorilla in the room. The fact that the state came out with an initiative and recommendations, and for whatever reason, we weren't aware of that, and subsequently didn't follow it. But we had an existing agreement that we abided by. So that's all these play into the conundrum we're in right now. And I'm coming at this from what I consider myself to be a member of an extended community. It's Whitman-Hanson Regional High School. It brings both towns together. There's a lot of benefit involved from regionalizing financially and otherwise. And I hope that we can remember that and keep that in perspective and continue to be good partners and figure out a way to get through this. That's how I'm coming at this, Rick.
Yeah, so I fully concur with the way you say that. And I don't want to send the wrong impression. I certainly understand the challenges that the town of Hanson is facing. We obviously have been in the same position ourselves. Just, I don't want to get too far off topic, but Whitman has some significant financial challenges and burdens that lie on the near horizon. We need to, fund a new middle school or major renovations to an existing school. We have a DPW that its conditions have been accurately described as hazardous. So there are definitely financial problems in both towns. And I fully support the fact that we are a 2-member regional school district, and we are definitely partners. And I obviously empathize with the situation that the town of Hanson finds itself in.
Mr. Scriven, if I can add in. So I see us as trying to look at the purpose of this committee is to look at our objectives. And I think Mr. Evans said it. What's the objective of this? And I see this as a couple of prongs. We definitely have a financial issue right on the desk of the school committee right now. I think the financial piece of our regional agreement is something we have to look hard and fast at. If we can modify, if we can make some compromise, if that's a big if. The second piece is the entire regional agreement that 91 was looked at in 2017 and was put to vote at the school committee level, at the Hanson level, and at the Whitman level. And right now we don't have an agreement. So there are two facets of this committee. I think looking at I think the idea is to try to come up with some financial compromise if we can. If we can't, I'm not sure. But this team here is really charged at fixing or amending or putting forth a new regional agreement, hopefully in FY for fiscal 21 moving forward. So the committee itself is built to look at the entirety of the regional agreement. And I think our objective would be, piece by piece. The financial piece for me right now and for Mr. Farrow and for the school committee is to get a budget out to the towns to vote. Depending right now, the school committee has voted the statutory method in. That's the method that I proposed in our budget. And with this, I know we've been talking publicly, and I know members of our community have met informally to see if there is any compromise on both sides of the table, because we know it is a financial impact to the town of Hanson to the tune of $1 million, and that would be a struggle. My charge for this committee is to make sure we put the best regional agreement forth for our kids, because those are the people that are impacted right now. And the burden right now that I think is facing all of us is the fact that we have a financial uncertainty in our nation, in our state, in our communities right now, outside the fact that we don't have a budget moving forward for the towns to vote on. So I think we look at it as our objective is to look at the entire regional agreement. But I think our first task, as Mr. Scriven has said it, and I know that he's passionate about it, is seeing how we can get a budget to the school committee that we can put forth to the both towns for vote in June. So I see those as our objectives. There's a big objective and then narrowing down the little objectives.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Jeff.
Chris?
Chris?
Could I maybe make a suggestion? I've one, or Chris, I've one thought, and maybe a little bit that's to kind of start at the end and work our way backwards, right? So, I mean, from my perspective, based on what can happen in either town, based on what can happen in town meeting, the end result of this, and based on the way it's calculated, in terms of per pupil costs, students in different grade levels, et cetera, to me, the end of this is the agreement should reflect the statutory method with the amounts above and beyond the foundation budget split by per pupil ratio. Essentially what we're in today by default. To me, if that's the end point, we can work our way backwards as to how we get there. I think that was the language that was actually suggested by Desi the last time around. It to me would make sense as maybe a starting point.
So,
Chris?
so
Laura?
Chris Howard, there's so many Chris's on this call. We've got to come up with nicknames or something. I'm sorry, Chris George. So what I think I'm hearing you say is, as a preliminary matter, to reach an agreement that the end game is that we acknowledge that because of a variety of factors, that statutory is ultimately where the agreement will land, and then back into where we are now.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood where you're going with that.
Chris Howard?
So I like what Chris George just said, and I would agree that that's where this is going to end up. And I think he was saying the same thing. I think that's what the state, when they went in and talked to us, ultimately said as well. When I do look at that agreement, right, that language read to you does kind of put us at an impasse, because the language in the agreement presently says we're using an agreement methodology that I think there needs to be some sort of compromise, because we're not using the full agreement methodology. We're not using the per pupil expenditure. So to me, it speaks to the fact we need to address that. The other thing I think to Mr. Anderson that I would point out, and I appreciate the position and thoughts that the citizens of Whitman have. Both towns have benefited financially. I think most importantly, as Chris Scriven pointed out, they've benefited in coming together as a community first and foremost. But from a strict economic standpoint, both towns have benefited financially by being a region over those decades that we've been regionalized. And so I think, again, and I mean this with respect, from the perspective, the entire agreement, we came together based upon a certain economic foundation that we're now changing. And so to Chris George's point, to me, just one person can see the shift. I'm just trying to come up with a pragmatic way that we can address that over a little bit of time. Because I think that, to me, that, you know, if we're just simply going to say the state changed it, we can do it, fine. But man, that was the basis for the town of Hanson to enter into a region. And so we're now kind of causing us to rethink that whole approach in terms of, does the region make sense? And I just, to me, I don't want to go there. I don't think it's what's best for the town. I don't think it's what's best economically. So I kind of really like where Chris George has taken us in terms of, that's the end state, but what are the steps that we can maybe take as a group to get there?
Yes,
Thanks, Bruce.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Bruce.
I want to echo the sentiments of Chris Howard and basically take you back to like 1991, 1992, when this whole thing was being hashed over and whether we should go pre-K through 8 and add that to the existing regional school, which at that time, which was 9 through 12. And is there anybody really there that really believes that if part of the if there was a stumbling block back then, and Whitman was saying, well, you know, we'd like to go into this full regionalization with you, but here's the catch: we're basically looking for a 10 or 12% surcharge on what you would normally pay using the percentage of pupil method. Would anybody from Hanson have passed that at the town meeting and gone pre-K through 12? Because that's what about it amounts to. This $1.2 million that's being thrust upon Hanson in 1
Bruce,
year.
what does that mean? So listen, I don't want to get into the methodology, right? But when you calculate the foundation budget for both towns, it comes out to $11,115 per pupil for both towns, and that takes into account where those pupils go to school, what grade they're in, whether they're on IEPs or not, etc. Right? The only thing that statutory is doing is taking into account where that Chapter 78 is supposed to go. There's no surcharge. In fact, if you look at the statutory method, it is a strict 60-40 split between the two towns. The only piece that's not that split is where the aid's directed to go. So let's be careful about language. Whatever we do for a compromise, if we choose to come up with a compromise, we'll need to pass both town meetings, including Whitman's. And if there isn't an acknowledgement that over the past 4 or 5 years, aid has moved from one area to another, if there isn't an acknowledgement that this is a 60-40 split under statutory, it's not going to pass either town.
Maybe you can explain that.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, if I could interrupt Bruce, I'm just going to ask if we could just abide by.
He's got to explain
Bruce,
that whole thing with the aid. He has
I don't
to
have
explain
Bruce's
it to
mute,
people.
so anybody get that? I just want to remind everybody to raise your hand, be acknowledged, just so we can keep an order to this. Okay. Give Bruce a chance to respond.
I just want him to explain the whole thing where it comes down to the state aid or where the state aid is supposed to go, because that is a stumbling block with a lot of people. So I think he really needs to explain that, what the breakdown of the state aid, because as you know, when the Chapter 70 comes out, it's not broken down by Whitman-Hanson. It's broken down into one lump sum of, and this year it's $24,886,620 going to the regional Whitman-Hanson Regional High School, and it's that way for every single district in the state. It's not broken down by any one town. So I think he needs to explain that, because he's saying that every time, and this is supposed to justify what's going on right now.
So Bruce, let me respond. If I'm not mistaken,
Chris, if you could please just raise your hand, I'll acknowledge, just for formality's sake. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
So if I'm not mistaken, I think there are people on this call who sat in the meeting. I was not there with Mars and I don't know if Desi was there, but my understanding is in that meeting, they acknowledged that Chapter 78 is calculated by town, regardless of how the check is paid.
And
it's calculated by town. So the statutory takes into account that Chapter 78 stays with the town that's supposed to stay with.
Chris Howard, did you have something?
Please.
So I think I'm just going to throw out there, we can certainly do these circles, and we've done them. I don't any disrespect to Chris' comment or Bruce's comment. I hope you guys will agree with me. We can have a lot of conversations about that and what Desi said and who said what. But I'm hoping maybe we can go back to where we were just a couple of minutes ago of what does the group think about in terms of if we acknowledge that maybe the end state is to get to a statutory methodology, is there perhaps a intermediary step we could take using the agreement this year as the means to kind of take that first step? And we still subsequently will need to you all got the agreement in your packet. We got schools in there that are no longer in the district. We have schools that are missing. There's a lot of things that need to be updated. I, again, am hoping we can do that in phase 2. But my question really to the folks on this committee is, do we think we can get some middle ground to get us to step 1?
I think that,
Go ahead, Laura.
yes, I'm sorry, Chris. I think what you're asking is a fundamentally good question, Mr. Howard, which is, I would really hope for the sake of trying to move forward that we are able to acknowledge that that the state has moved in the direction of statutory, that in the absence of us getting a regional agreement, a revised or amended a regional agreement in place, that more than likely we're going to end up at a position where we're going to end up at super town meeting, and we all know where we go. And I just personally, I think we've all, at least those of us on the phone, have discussed this ad nauseum. I think we know where one another stand historically. With certain people from Whitman feeling as though Whitman is paid too much, and I can certainly appreciate your perspective on that. But again, I don't think that it was anything that was intentionally done by Hanson to Whitman. And what we're here to talk about is the regional agreement and a path forward. And so I do think that as a fundamental matter, to circle back to Mr. George's original point, I think we've got to agree. Can at least the majority of the people on the phone, at least as a preliminary matter, agree that at some point that regional agreement is going to end in a statutory method? Again, to your point, Mr. George, you'd still have the per pupil, split for everything other than the Chapter 70 money. So I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like we need to set some kind of a baseline of what we're trying to head towards. And, I know, like, for instance, like Mr. Anderson would want it statutory now and statutory forever. And so we kind of know where he stands. And so we kind of know, also maybe where, like, Mr. Young stands, which is that, we should have maybe a hybrid method, or we should be doing, per pupil, as an evergreen matter. So I don't know if we need a motion or what that looks like, or if you just do a round robin, Mr. Scriven, and just generally get people to say whether they agree with that, because I just don't know how we move forward without circling this drain over and over and over again and hearing the same things over and over and over again, which is not going to be a productive use of any of our time.
I agree. Thank you, Laura. So yeah, would anyone like to make a motion to acknowledge that, I guess? Is that what we're looking to do?
I will make a motion.
What's the motion?
I will make a motion to go around and, at least as a preliminary matter, get acknowledgement that the Regional Agreement Committee will be talking about a path forward that ultimately will lead to the statutory method, with some method of compromise yet to be determined, prior to moving to that. And I'm not talking about timeframes or what that method is or anything of that sort. We're not talking about how the sausage is made, because I don't know how the sausage is going to be made, but we're just talking about, as a preliminary matter, that we're acknowledging that, not necessarily that we like it, but that may be the way that we need to move forward, given the way that the deck is stacked.
Second? Well, Justin, go ahead.
I'll second that in effort of a good faith argument moving forward.
Who's that? Who is that? Oh, Justin.
Justin.
Evans.
I think we've all acknowledged that for long-term sustainability, statutory is going to have to be the method. Otherwise, any year, any town meeting can force us this way. Or what may happen this year is we don't have time for town meeting to meet and approve a budget, so we were forced to a statutory method.
I'm sorry, Justin, could you repeat that last part?
In the event that we don't set a budget this year, or that the school committee doesn't assess the towns,
Right.
we will be in statutory method.
Right, right. And Jeff Simonak,
Yes.
could you speak to the potential ramifications of not coming to a compromise and what might happen?
So just for formalities, Chris, you have a motion and a second. You open it up for discussion. I'd be very happy to
Yeah,
talk
okay,
to that.
I'll open it for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to keep
I
formal here
appreciate that.
too.
Yep.
And then once we get past that discussion, make sure you do a roll call, because I always forget that now that we're virtual too. Okay. So if we go to 1/12, it'll really depend upon the commissioner, and we've heard different things coming out of DESI, from our superintendent's listserv, from our regional agreement meetings that we've had with the finance people from DESI. The commissioner's looking at a 2020 budget, but I also know that could be a 2020 budget, a 1/12 2020 budget for both communities right now. But the commissioner can have some leeway in what he feels the towns might need. So if I look at July 1 at a 2020, strictly by the numbers, we'd be looking at close to 35 layoffs of people. But we have to look at unemployment, and that would be about 48 positions district-wide. They could be teaching positions, they could be administrative positions, they could be paraprofessional secretary positions. But because we have to cover unemployment for those 35, we have to go with a higher number. So an FY20 budget it's just no movement. It's the same budget we had this year. And that FY20 budget would also be calculated under statutory. And I do not know what the assessment off the top of my head right now, what that would mean for both communities, because the FY20 budget would be recalculated using the statutory method. And anything the commissioner gives us going forward for an FY21 budget, if he increases that, would be using the statutory method.
Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else have anything for discussion? Laura?
Yep, and I had seen in the chat box that Jeff had mentioned maybe we should invite Mars to join us. And I think that's a fantastic idea, Chris, because I think what's important is we've all been privy to different conversations. You know, the school committee's had some conversations. There's been, the selectmen have had some, you know, various groups of constituents. FinCom have had others and all of that. And I think maybe just as a fundamental matter, trying to get everybody up to speed on what Mars is saying is the way things operate as just sort of ground rules, I think would be kind of critical to helping everybody reach an agreement. Because if we all understand the same set of facts, if we're all hearing the same set of facts being presented by a third uninterested party that's telling us this is the way it works, this is what we've seen with other regional schools, this is what we're suggesting, I think that might help us just to all hear that together.
Yeah, I agree. And that's been suggested by others in the past too, Laura. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea. And we can certainly invite them when we schedule our next meeting. I saw Jeff's hand.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as far as that, I think time is a resource for us right now. And I can reach out if the committee charges me forward. I can email Mars today and have them probably at our next meeting virtually. I think they're in the same boat we are. They're working hard with the state. There's quite a few regional school districts right now struggling. If we go to if the state allows regionals to go to a 1/12 budget because of just town meetings not being able to happen, Mars is thin. But I think we can absolutely invite them in, and they're familiar with us. And Laura, I think they were helpful when they sat around the table with us. I think they can bring a different, like you said, a third party who's not vested in us directly and give us some guidance.
Thanks, Jeff. Rick?
Yes, just since we're talking about moving to, you know, the question on the table here is about the position of compromise. I think it would be beneficial if perhaps Selectman Kemet, maybe you could give a summary of the discussions that have taken place to date, a summary of the meetings that have taken for the members of this committee who were not afforded the opportunity to participate.
Well, I mean, I feel a little weird being the one to speak to it, but I guess if you want to make me the spokesperson, I mean, Justin is on the phone. I think he could just as easily speak to it. But our primary focus in most of our meetings was about what the audit was going to be on the school, the audit that we've both co-funded. So that was, I would say, probably 95% of what we talked about. The other 5% was really talking about what could we each, if the school committee continued down what had been voted as the statutory method for funding the budget, then what could we do in the way of a compromise? And was Whitman able to potentially offer something up? And I don't know that any votes had ever been taken by the Whitman Board of Selectmen, so I definitely don't want to overstate, the commitment, but there was definitely a conversation which I mentioned at, I think, not our last selectmen's meeting, but the meeting prior to that, where it had been suggested that perhaps a line item could be plucked out of the school budget. And we know that Bridgewater and Rainham have done something similar, and other regional school districts have as well. We don't have complete transparency on exactly how it was structured, but for instance, in this case, it was suggested that perhaps Whitman could pay for curriculum, which was somewhere in the vicinity of 400 some odd thousand. Again, does it solve the problem? Does it, completely mitigate, the additional cost to Hanson for going to statutory versus going to, the per pupil? No, but the thought process was, is there some way to try to preserve that partnership and an olive branch, a sort of like okay, we know that you're going to statutory and that's going to pose some hardships, and in consideration for that, we're willing to do X. And again, Rick, I really don't know where the Whitman Board of Selectmen are on that. I mean, maybe Justin could answer that question, but that was what was discussed. That was really what was put on the table.
Thank you.
Justin?
Oh, Mr.
Sure,
Chairman?
I'll weigh in on
Go
that.
ahead,
Ms. Kemet characterized it accurately. I think the only other hang up that the Whitman Board of Selectmen was hoping for was that Hanson would meet some minimum level of funding before we begin looking for opportunities to relieve individual items. That was one of the reasons why both boards of selectmen pushed so hard for a school budget to be voted, so we would know what items could move to one town or the other.
Thanks, Justin. All right, if there's no other further discussion, I'd like to.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm not really ready to vote on this, and I'm not really ready to vote for a very valid reason, because you really don't know where you're going to stand in either fiscal 2021 or fiscal 2022, for that matter, and the whole effect that this whole coronavirus shutdown has on the economy, and all of the people have been thrown out of work, and the state saying that all bets are off on what your Chapter 70 is going to be, and the state revenues are tanking. And keep in mind, as the state revenues tank, and your $25 million in Chapter 70 is affected adversely, that's going to have an adverse effect on the assessment that comes back to the two towns. And with Hanson already looking at $1,150,000 if we go to statutory, that's going to be even worse. So how in the world can I say at this point that I think that the town of Hanson should just go to the statutory rather than looking at a fair compromise between both methods, if I don't even know what the whole financial situation in the state and Chapter 70 and the school budget looks like. I mean, I can't possibly make that decision at this point.
Thanks, Bruce.
So-
Laura?
Yep, fair enough, Mr. Young. I hear what you're saying, and there's to say that there's economic uncertainty would be the understatement of the day. I'm wondering, Chris, we don't necessarily have to. I know we've got a motion and a second on the table, but I'm more than willing to walk back that motion. If we think that we can queue up Mars for the next, next meeting, and then I think, once we've laid that preliminary foundation, I think people would have a clearer idea of, the Mars position and sort of what their perspective is. And I think it would inform maybe some of the rest of our discussion.
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, I guess I'm slightly confused, and I'll go back to my original statement. This committee charge is to talk about coming up with a regional agreement, not coming up with a school budget. That's the school committee's charge. The statutory method is in play already and has been voted. Now, the question was, can we ease into this? And hopefully some people were saying we could do this. Now, is Mars going to come and talk to this committee as an amendment trying to straighten out a regional agreement? Or is Mars going to come to the school committee and try to tell us how to set a budget? These are two separate things.
I
That's
thought
all
they
I'm
would
saying.
I thought they'd be talking to us about the regional agreement. And
That's what I'm asking.
and what they've seen other districts do, and why they've seen other districts do it. Basically, what they said at the meeting that was held up at the high school.
With,
Yes, with
I'm
us.
sorry, Laura.
Yeah.
With, I can't recall her name now, Christine Lynch.
Right.
No,
what
it
you're
wasn't
saying?
Christine.
No, it
was-
wasn't Christine.
It was Michelle from Mars.
Okay,
Okay, sorry. So we do have a motion. We could take a vote, or you could rescind, I guess, Laura.
Yeah, I'll withdraw my motion pending, but I would like to have it taken up at the next meeting. And I hope that Jeff is able to, and I know it's tricky because they're probably all working remotely and getting pulled in a million different directions, but I'm hopeful that they'll make themselves available to us. And I think once they sit down and lay it out the way that they laid it out for us previously, I personally had a lot of light bulbs go off, and I think maybe other people would too.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's an excellent idea that Laura has, because I have some questions for Mars too on some of the other questions that have come up that other members of this committee have also extolled in previous discussion. And I have some questions I'd like to relieve myself of with the Mars people as well before we progress on this any further.
Okay, Bruce, thank you. So given that, I guess we'll have Jeff contact Mars, and we'll pick a date and schedule another meeting. Sorry, go ahead,
George.
I was just going to make a suggestion. If there are questions out there for Mars in the event that they can't join our next meeting, perhaps those could be submitted to Jeff ahead of time.
Yes.
So that he could communicate those.
Thanks,
I think
Chris.
even if they can meet with us, it might be helpful to get those questions in advance.
I would appreciate that. If anybody, Bruce, you just said you had multiple questions. I think instead of just asking them, send me those questions. I'll forward all correspondence to them, excuse me, and to this committee, so that you guys know what everybody's questions are ahead of time for that next meeting. As soon as we hang up here, I will email them and see what availability they have. And I assume this committee can kind of scramble. Most of us are working remotely from home. Is 3 o'clock a good time if I can get them on board? I know they're working remotely. Yes, Justin?
At 4 o'clock would be better for me. I'm still working in the field. I'm a public utilities engineer. That doesn't stop.
Yikes. I think Mr. Dyer also had some you know, is working as well. I mean, most of us are working, but I think, you know, 3 o'clock would present issues for him. I don't know if he even was able to join us today.
So what I'm hearing, before, not to take anything from you, Chris, what I'm hearing is I will contact Mars. People will send me a list of questions as they come up. I will present them to Mars, and I'll also share all those questions with this committee, so an understanding of what other people are asking, so that you're well versed in before our next session, which I would hope to be early next week or middle of next week.
Perfect.
Jeff. Rick?
If there's no further business, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we're gonna take a roll call vote. I'm sorry, Jeff?
No, I was just going to say, Michelle said who joined. Bob left.
Oh, okay,
Michelle, Bob left. Nobody
all
joined.
right.
That, I need to know that. Okay, Bob left.
Yes.
Thank you.
All set.
Yeah.
So we'll take a roll call vote to adjourn. I'll just start with Justin,
Yes.
Chris Howard,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Chris George,
Yes.
Bruce Young,
Yes.
Laura.
Yes.
Have I left anybody out, Jeff?
Yourself. You
Oh,
forgot
yeah.
Yourself.
Okay, so we will adjourn. I'd just like to thank everyone.
Thank you.
Participating in this.
Appreciate it.
It's crucial for us as a district, and it's very much appreciated. I hope everyone stays healthy, and we'll look to hear from Jeff as to when we can have our next meeting. Michelle? you had
Is the
something?
next meeting next Wednesday at 4 o'clock?
Can we do
We
it?
have not set a date.
Okay.
All right. All
Thank
right.
you. Stay
Thank
safe.
you all. I appreciate
Thank
it
you.
very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.